See, we can make a deal. The words of US President Donald Trump after a prisoner swap with Iran. The rare diplomatic breakthrough comes after months of heightened tensions between the two nations. 3 months after Trump declared a near-certain peace deal with the Taliban dead, talks resume in Doha. The US leader had hinted at renewed diplomatic efforts during his surprise visit to Afghanistan. And a brutal gun and knife attack against Baghdad's anti-government protesters kills 25 people and injures over 130 more, marking the deadliest incident to hit the Iraqi capital in weeks. Thank you for joining us in the France 24 newsroom. I'm Nadia Sharbi. Despite months of rising tensions, Washington and Tehran have swapped prisoners this Saturday. In a trade conducted in Zurich via Swiss mediators, Iranian officials handed over a Chinese-American Princeton graduate student, detained since 2016 in Tehran, for an Iranian scientist who'd faced a federal trial in Georgia. While taking to Twitter, President Trump thanked Tehran for what he called a very fair negotiation, adding, "See, we can make a deal." A little earlier, we spoke to our international affairs editor Douglas Herbert, who began by telling us more about the two men.
Jiwei Wang was a Chinese-born American. He was naturalized as an American citizen. He had been a fourth-year graduate student at Princeton University, and he had gone to Iran to study Farsi and to study Iranian history when he was arrested in 2016 in August. A few months later, in a trial in April 2017, he was convicted of 2 charges of espionage, charges which his family and the U.S. government formally denied. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison, and he had been serving them out. But he wasn't just spending time in jail anywhere. It was in Evin prison, which is notorious as the holding cell, the repository of most of the political prisoners, those deemed political prisoners in Iran. The one for whom he was swapped, Masoud Soleimani. He was a stem cell researcher who was arrested when he landed at a Chicago airport last year in October 2018. And what was he charged with? He was arrested and charged with violating American sanctions, the trade embargo on Iran. And why? Because he was charged with seeking to transfer growth hormones, part of his stem cell research, to Tehran, which was in violation or would be in violation of those U.S. sanctions on Iran. His lawyers had claimed that it was very ambiguous. He was caught up also in the tensions between the U.S. and Iran. He was just, a little person caught up in much bigger geopolitics. Both sides, both men claiming absolute innocence, not guilty of anything as charged. And we've seen similar cases to them before. But now the U.S. has been saying in the case of the release of Masoud Soleimani, they say it's a small price to pay because he was nearing the end of his term in prison. He was going to be released, I believe, next year in exchange for a plea agreement, a plea deal. So all sides, everyone's happy. But like I said, there are more prisoners on each side who remain in each country's respective prisons.
So everyone's happy, but also this swap comes amid high tensions between the two nations. Could it perhaps be a sign of better things to come?
Is it just a one-off is sort of what you're asking. Look, what would Iran's motivations right now be for releasing? Because remember, there's no U.S. embassy right now in Tehran. So the actual release was negotiated by the Swiss interest section is what gets the hostages out. Why would Iran want to do this? Well, you could speculate, and it's only speculation because Iran isn't saying. It could be perhaps at a moment where Iran's been in the headlines for a brutal crackdown on demonstrators and protesters in the country in response to a 50% hike on gas prices. There's been, hundreds, the Americans say hundreds have been killed in that, thousands more imprisoned. Perhaps they're trying to soften their image. Perhaps they're trying to deflect a little bit of attention. Perhaps they're looking for some good news story to take all of the world's attention off of what is, by all reports, a brutal crackdown.
Meanwhile, Washington has resumed talks with the Taliban this Saturday in Qatar. The renewed diplomatic efforts come 3 months after President Trump abruptly put an end to negotiations, calling them dead, and withdrawing an invitation for the Taliban to join secret talks in Camp David. During his surprise visit to Afghanistan last week, Trump had stated that the insurgents want to make a deal. Marius Sofos reports.
3 months after US President Donald Trump abruptly halted diplomatic efforts to begin the withdrawal of American troops from Afghanistan, official talks between the US and the Taliban resumed on Saturday. Led by the US peace envoy Zalmay Khalilzad, the negotiations are primarily aimed at getting the Taliban to de-escalate violence in the country, with the ultimate goal being a permanent ceasefire. This, according to the US State Department. The resurrected talks are being held in Qatar's capital city, Doha, where the Taliban maintain a political office. They follow several days of discussions in Kabul, where Khalilzad met with Afghan President Ashraf Ghani. So far, the Taliban has refused to speak directly with Ghani, calling him a puppet of the United States. Back in September, it appeared that the US and the Taliban were on the verge of signing a deal that would have seen Washington begin withdrawing thousands of troops in return for security guarantees, ending a 4-decade-long conflict. The same month, though, Donald Trump ended the talks in no uncertain terms.
They're dead. They're dead. As far as I'm concerned, they're dead.
Last week, though, during a surprise Thanksgiving visit to a US military base in Afghanistan, there was a volte-face from the US president as he declared that the Taliban wants to make a deal.
At least 25 people killed and over 130 wounded. That's the latest official death toll after a bloody night of attacks in Baghdad. Armed with firearms and knives, unidentified men targeted anti-government demonstrators in the vicinity of the capital's Tahrir Square late Friday. 3 police officers are among those killed. And in the midst of some of the deadliest violence since protests began on October 1st, an influential Shiite cleric and lawmaker says a drone targeted his home in the city of Najaf this Saturday. Our correspondent Mustafa Katan tells us more.
Well, this is something big in Iraq, especially if you attack the house of one of the most influential Shiite clerics in Iraq, and we are talking about Muqtada Sadr, by a drone. This is something can maybe put more escalation in Iraq right now, and also can make things more complicated. Some of the protesters of Muqtada Sadr see this attack as an open war against them, and Muhammad Saleh al-Iraqi, who is a guy speaking on behalf of Muqtada Sadr on social media and on Facebook, his post, seen as ordered by Muqtada Sadr followers, said that he urged all his supporters to go to the house of Muqtada Sadr in Najaf to protect the house of their leaders and also to prevent any further attacks. What happened yesterday was really unprecedented, something really new, because all the time during the last 2 months, we see clashes between protesters and Iraqi security forces, especially riot police, when these police officers using tear gas canisters and also sometimes live ammunition against the protesters, trying to disperse them and trying to drive them out from reaching the heavy fortified green zone. But yesterday, an armed group opened fire, trying to kill as much as they can in the Khilani Square, which is close to Tahrir Square. And the Iraqi security forces yesterday just didn't really intervene that much, and most of the people were really angry about the reaction of the officials in Iraq. Iraqi security forces yesterday, they just said that all their formation will be on high alert, just to trying to contain any consequences of this attack.
This Saturday, Algerian expatriates in France were invited to take part in early voting ahead of the December 12th presidential election. But amid calls to boycott a poll that most see as offering little to no chance of real change, many came out to demonstrate near the Algerian consulate in Paris.
With flags in hand or draped around the neck, Algerian expatriates took to the streets of Paris on Saturday in protest against their country's upcoming presidential election. Many wore white hats, symbolising their wish to demonstrate peacefully. Others carried red cards, a sign of their disagreement with the election, which will take place on December 12th.
It has no purpose. It's just about the continuation of oppression and stealing from the Algerian people.
Many think that everything will be resolved on December 12th, but no. Some people have decided to take the country's fate into their own hands.
For us, Algeria needs to be democratic and free, otherwise it's nothing.
The location of the protest, in Paris's 11th arrondissement, wasn't a coincidence. Just a few metres away is the Algerian consulate, where also on Saturday some Algerian expats in the capital came to vote.
I came here to vote because I love my country. What can I say to those who came to protest? Well, it's their thing, not mine. I'm just going to do my duty as an Algerian citizen. And that's it.
Several police officers were deployed outside the consulate in case of disturbances.
Around 1,000 people took part in an authorised rally in the Belarus capital this Saturday. This as longtime ruler Alexander Lukashenko was meeting with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin in Moscow. According to the Kremlin, the two men discussed, quote, key issues in bilateral relations, including the prospects for deepening integration, a rapprochement that protesters reject as potential Russian occupation. Here's a clip of some of the mostly young people who gathered near government headquarters in Minsk.
People took to the streets today to protest against the so-called integration that looks like a real occupation and surrender of the national interests of Belarus. People came to protest against it today, and so did I.
We're against integration. We want Belarus to remain a sovereign state. We don't want to unite with other countries.
Minimal transport and major disruption. That's the situation here in France as the most serious strike to hit the country in years continues to play out this Saturday. The strike has so far been extended over the weekend, but unions warn it could last well into next week with demonstrations scheduled for Tuesday. The industrial action comes in response to plans by President Emmanuel Macron to radically revamp the country's pension system. Meanwhile, the so-called Yellow Vest movement that has largely petered out since the summer is seeking to ride the walkout wave, as has called for protests across France this Saturday. Despite pleas to cancel a meeting rejected as a propaganda exercise, Pope Francis held a private audience with outgoing Maltese Prime Minister Joseph Muscat this Saturday. Facing questions over the handling of the murder of journalist Daphne Caruana Galizia, Muscat announced last Sunday that he would step down in January. Mass protests over the much criticised probe into Galicia's 2017 killing has also led to the resignation of his chief of staff and tourism minister. Now, feminist outrage has gone viral and global, hoping to bring attention to femicide, rape and impunity concerning violence against women. A performance piece mixing song and dance is being performed across Latin America and here in Europe. Erin Ogunki explains.
The performance and its accompanying anthem, entitled A Rapist in Your Path, have gone viral. It's not our fault, they chant. The rapist is you. The song rings loud and clear across Latin America. Here in Buenos Aires, hundreds of women staged the performance, aimed at bringing attention to the global spiral of gender violence, rape culture, and victim shaming.
We are calling for equality and women's rights, for them to recognize us and stop raping us, discriminating against us, and for a more equal society. That is what we want.
The song was originally written by the Chilean feminist theater group Las Tesis. The lyrics, based on the writings of an Argentinian feminist academic, describe the way political power structures maintain systemic violations of women's rights. They say they never intended for it to become a protest song. They credit the thousands of women who also wanted to bring attention to gender-based violence with the anthem's now viral spread. And the sounds of their voices have indeed reverberated across the world, from several Latin American countries to the UK, Spain, and France.
We answered the call of our Chilean sisters, who brought the world's attention to their experiences with their song and dance. So we're here out of solidarity and because we too are living under the patriarchy, and it's rough.
That the Chilean performance has so quickly gathered steam elsewhere is surely a product not only of the thought-provoking lyrics and movements, but also of the sheer reality that violence against women and lackluster societal reactions are international in scope.
Well, with that, we leave this edition, but for more, you can visit our website. That's france24.com, where you'll find more on all the stories we've been developing here, including the consequences of this nationwide strike here in France, just a few weeks away from Christmas. You'll also find sports, business and culture news on that, so do take a look. That's it for now. Stay tuned to France 24.